points of view and content on Voices of the Community are those of the speakers and do not reflect those of this station, its management, administration, and the Board of Trustees of City College of San Francisco. This is George Custer from KCSF's Voices of the Community. Welcome to our listeners around the country and around the world. Voices of the Community brings you critical issues facing Civic citizens in the area. We introduce you to voices who are working on solutions that benefit local and regional community members, neighborhoods, cities, and the region. We would appreciate your feedback and comments on what you like about the show, what you want to hear more about, or less about. So please go to Mixcloud and search for Voices of the Community and comment in the comment section of the show. This is George Coster from KCSF and your host of Voices of the Community. Today's show is focused on economic development, community development, and civic innovation. We will be discussing the social, economic, and environmental impact of financially enabling small businesses in our neighborhood commercial districts, as well as how local governments are supporting the reinvention of these neighborhood main streets. Our show on economic development and civic innovation features fellow community members and organizations that are working to provide support and solutions to the mom-and-pop businesses that make up a large portion of our local economy, workforce, and the fabric of our community. Today's show features these voices of our community: Kathy Hickey, founder of Hickey Consulting; Carla Mays, founder of Mays Civic Innovation; and Andrea Baker, founder of Andrea Baker Consulting.
This is George Coster from KCSF's Voices of the Community with Kathy Hickey, a consultant in economic and community development about civic innovation through her work with small businesses, government, and community stakeholders. Welcome to Voices of the Community, Kathy.
Thanks, George. I'm happy to be here.
Let's start off with what community and economic development means.
To me, it's about working with communities. For me, because my core love is commercial corridor revitalization. So a lot of the work that I've done in the past has been in low to moderate income neighborhoods that have high vacancy rates and a lot of residents who want to see more services and have the ability to access restaurants, cafes, that sort of things in their neighborhood. For me, it's taking the vision of the community and translating that onto their commercial corridor. For me, the key approach in doing all of that is actually sourcing locally. So that way I can help to build the wealth of the community. So it's working with people who have a dream, who are sort of a wannabe entrepreneur, and getting them to the resources that they need, whether it's small business development services, financing, looking for partners, that sort of thing, and acting as the mediator. And then as they're going through that process, helping them to identify a commercial space that they like. And then, if possible, working to get them an introduction to the property owner. I don't do lease negotiations, but I can usually point them in a way of pro bono attorney services, and sort of helping them, make their dream a reality. And so, for me, that's what community and economic development means: is that it's local.
Explain to the audience what commercial corridors are.
Sure. So. Commercial corridors are the shopping districts that we all patronize every single day. So what I do is think about all the things on commercial corridors that people typically don't. I like to say that I do a lot of the unseen work. So that's working with business owners to maybe pull in goods off the street or they're blocking sidewalk access, making sure the garbage is being picked up, working on facade improvement programs, and doing business attraction retention, and then on occasion managing large streetscape projects.
Then let's break it down. So facade improvement programs are?
Facade improvement programs, it's typically a grant either from like a community benefit district, which is a property tax assessment district. So property taxes are collected from property owners, and the money creates a budget that's gathered within that district, and it just goes right back into the district for services like sanitation, marketing, promotion, small business advocacy. A facade improvement program is usually a small grant. It's usually a matching grant, so it can be like 1 to 2. So for every $1, you get a grant for $2, up to, let's say, $5,000 to redo your storefront. So that can be new windows, new awnings, sometimes it's lighting, sometimes it's a brand new gate. And then when you're working with an organization that's doing a facade improvement program, they usually have sort of policies and procedures on how they move forward and what they will fund, because they want to make sure that their money is going towards attractive investment.
A streetscape
Streetscape projects are when suddenly nice new trash cans, trees, benches, banners sort of appear on a street. And that's usually a large community process to go through creating a streetscape. And then it has to be built. So somebody like me would work with, and back in the day in California would have been redevelopment. And then when I was doing this work in Brooklyn, New York, I worked with Empire State Development. And so in working with Empire State Development, they would sort of help us put together a budget and manage the project. And we always had an architect and that sort of thing.
How would a small commercial corridor, like one in the Excelsior district you worked on, or the Fillmore district in San Francisco, how would they actually finance something like this?
Again, back in the day, it would have been redevelopment, or start to work with the Office of Economic and Workforce Development in San Francisco to sort of figure out how to fund that sort of thing. But you can also fund it, I think, through state transit-oriented development dollars, but that usually goes through larger transportation grants to cities. And then there's maybe some TOD money, transportation-oriented development.
Right.
Yeah.
There's things like what people call bids or P-bids. Could you explain to the audience what a bid or a P-bid is?
Right. A P-bid, which is a property business improvement district or business improvement district, or as you call them in California, community benefit district, which I mentioned earlier, is a property assessment district. And so you have a group of property owners within a commercial corridor who say, we want clean streets, new banners, we want to have an identity, we want to do marketing. And so they go through a process to create a business improvement district. It's about a 12-step process. 51% of the district has to vote for a dollar amount. And then they vote for that dollar amount. If you get 51%, then you create a business improvement district, and that money, let's say it's $250,000, goes back into the district to support essentially a new organization that manages the district.
An example of that would be your recent work with Lower Polk in San Francisco.
Yes.
And you might describe Lower Polk first, and then what you did working with the city's Office of Workforce and Economic Development
Sure.
and the merchants to actually turn it around.
Right. For Lower Polk CBD, I was at the time working at Local Initiative Support Corporation, which is an intermediary organization. It's national. And it's called LISC for short. During my time at LISC, I was a consultant to the Lower Polk CBD campaign. So this is when they were forming CBD.
And a CBD
is a community benefits district. And so I was working at the time with a gentleman named Shell Thomas, who was the project manager for that. I was helping Shell to manage the work and think about what it needed to be done in order to get to 51% of the votes. Unfortunately, he passed away suddenly. And because he and I had been working so closely together, I was able to step in as the project manager, help them get through the rest of the campaign, which the CBD was passed, I think, at the beginning of July in 2015. Lower Polk's a really interesting neighborhood. It's definitely going through a lot of transition right now. There's a lot of market rate houses buildings that are being built. Also has a lot of social issues, particularly homeless. The CBD is really part of their focus is to continue to work with current service agencies like Larkin Street Youth to address issues in the community, provide ambassador services to neighbors, cleaning, all those sorts of things.
What would you say is the biggest challenges for small businesses, that are in urban areas like Oakland that we're sitting in today, or Alameda, or San Francisco?
The feedback that I hear from a lot of small business owners is that it takes too long to open up a business. When I was working on Ocean Avenue as their first executive director, I attracted Champa Garden to a new retail space, and it took them almost 2 years to open. And that's because they had to change the zoning on the building, they had to do renovations, then they had to go through a public process because one of the neighbors complained because they thought it was Champagne Garden and they were a neighbor and they thought that there was going to be alcohol there. For me, a business should be able to open up their doors in 3 months, and part of that should be paid for. But it seems like with businesses that are trying to open up, whether it's San Francisco or Oakland, you have to have very, very deep pockets in order to be able to go through a 2-year process, 1-year process. Because you're paying rent that entire time with absolutely no income. To me, that needs to change.
Added to that is some of the big issues are financing, which I know
Yes.
you've worked on, and you have a background in
Yeah.
working on SBA small
Yeah.
loan program, for example. How difficult is it for a proverbial mom and pop, organization to secure funds?
I think in some ways it's a little bit easier now since you've got loan programs like Kiva, where it's 0% interest rate. You start with a small loan. That is a great thing. When I used to work with Axion New York, which is a micro lender, Axion is fantastic. They're very good at what they do, but their interest rate is sort of always the key complaint that I heard from a lot of entrepreneurs. And so what I've sort of learned over the years that traditional banks are not going to lend. And so I like to advocate for alternative lenders. Specifically, I really like sending people to community development credit unions because you're supporting, a local credit union that knows a community very well. They're invested in the community. Their lending criteria is usually a lot more lenient. Not to say that it's that you can pull one over on them, but they're willing to work with the borrower in order to make sure that they are getting access to the financing that they need.
You recently did some work with Kiva, as I understand, with Liz when you were working there to help some of the small businesses
Right.
you work with.
At the time, we were working with the downtown Richmond Business Improvement District here in Richmond, California. High vacancy rate, really interesting commercial corridor with a lot of community assets, but not a lot of patrons. And so what we did was create a partnership between Kiva and downtown Richmond in order to start to attract small businesses to the district. And I know that through that partnership they were able to fund a bike shop, and I think that was sort of the first step.
When did you get engaged in working in community and economic development? What drew you to the work?
I started out as a small business loan officer at the Lower East Side People's Federal Credit Union in Lower Manhattan right after September 11th. And what I saw was a lot of small businesses that were being wiped out. While there was all this money for loans flooding in, none of them could access it because they didn't have computers anymore, they didn't have paperwork, they didn't have insurance. And so what I saw through that was the need for technical assistance, because I feel like if everybody had had their ducks in a row, the story would have looked a little bit different for some businesses. I started teaching, or became a small business development specialist, taught some classes, did a lot of one-on-one, and that was mostly in Brooklyn. And then from that, I guess one day my brother came back from a meeting with a guy named John Broderick, who at the time was the executive director of Flatbush Development, which is in central Brooklyn. And we were talking about what Flatbush's needs were, which was a lot of merchants associations, and he and I started talking about it. And it just so happened that I ended up in an event, I think 2 weeks later, and happened to meet John, and we talked. And I ended up going on a tour of Flatbush with him and seeing what their needs were and interviewing for their director of economic development. I was just telling the story last night. I had this moment where I was standing on Flatbush Avenue in front of, I think it was called the Crystal Palace, which was a reception hall. We were going in for a meeting, and this is after I'd been hired. And he's talking to me about how to form a business improvement district. And I just remember standing on that sidewalk, looking at the Flatbush Nostrand Junction, and just being like, what are you talking about? And just sort of figuring out how to do that work and really falling in love with it, because it was, to me, to this day, it's probably still the most dynamic position I've ever had. I got to do a little bit of everything with absolutely no training and just by feel, and really getting to know the neighborhood, the history of the neighborhood, which I loved, knowing a lot of residents, and really, and eventually moving there because it was my home. And to this day, it's still home. So that's sort of how I fell in love with this work.
Throughout your time, you've come to understand how to work with communities and how to work with government and private industry. And now you've decided that you wanted to go back to school at Mills College to pursue more skills. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so right now I'm at Mills College getting my MBA. I chose Mills because I love their sort of mission, vision, and values. It really spoke to me. And the reason I decided to go back to school, because I was realizing that, I think I was hitting a personal ceiling with the work that I was doing, and I needed to find new ways to do it. and I also needed the technical skills to be able to do the work that I want to do. So quantitative, qualitative, new ways to look at how to market districts or work with small businesses to market. Having a better understanding of when I'm talking to a small business owner and, I'm lucky enough where they trust me to open up their books so I can actually sit down with them and have a conversation about that. And I guess for me, it's like, depending on what sort of role I step into in some sort of organization, being able to have the leadership and management skills that I feel personally are sort of the heart of the matter, and just sort of an opportunity to grow myself and learn new things and stretch, which is why.
That leads me into, I think, one of the things you had mentioned were the idea of facades. And then there's, within the facades, there's buildings. There's a big part of what you do is real estate, right?
Yeah.
The idea of taking either rundown real estate or historical real estate. So how do you think that the Mills skill set will help you?
I actually got to take a really great real estate class, and the woman who taught it was phenomenal. She gave us a project where we had to look at a piece of property in Oakland, sort of make an assessment about it, and then think about how a developer would develop it, and then put together a pro forma that she gave us. It was, ran through everything, which was so cool. And so for me, going through that exercise was something I kind of knew a little bit about, but not a lot. Those kind of skills are something else I would like to learn a little bit.
With all of the work that you've done in the idea of community and economic development, now reworking and adding some more skills to your skill set, where do you see kind of economic and community development going? Where, if you were to start working in a community next week, what are the things that you'd like to see happen or need to happen to actually help? Because what's so interesting about what you're doing is it empowers the economically disadvantaged to become empowered.
Right.
Whether it's starting a business.
Like I said at the beginning of the conversation, for me, it's all about what people in the neighborhood want to see. I've developed a philosophy that is kind of the motivator and the driver of a lot of the work that I do, which is I believe that everybody deserves access to a commercial corridor where they can live, shop, work, and play, and it has all the services that they need. And that's, again, my belief. And so when I work in a community, it's a community. It's not just the commercial corridor that I'm working on. It is 5 blocks out. It's like, what's the history? What's happening? Why does the commercial corridor look like it does? Why do we have pockets? What's going on with the property ownership? And so for me, I sort of take that micro and macro look at what's happening within that neighborhood. And then from there, you can also sort of extrapolate out what's happening within a city. But that's what I do when I start working, is I get to know everybody. So it's a lot of pounding the pavement. Even just, sort of taking my own time to walk around and make observations.
I know you've worked a lot with government and nonprofits. What could they do?
San Francisco, with the Invest in Neighborhoods, has sort of hit on something, and I think they're actually doing a really good job of reaching out to and developing commercial corridors. And what's great is that it's really becoming a model for other cities. I know New York is looking at it. I think San Diego. I think that's really good. I came out of the New York City Small Business Services, which was one of my major funders. I personally loved how they funded, which was everybody had an opportunity to apply for an RFP. All the money was fair game. And, it was sort of broad categories in which you could apply. For me, that was always... It worked. It was good. Because I also worked for a lot of business improvement districts, especially the Metro Tech bid. It was a large budget. It was $2.6 million. I was actually able to manage a pretty sizable budget to do the kind of programming that I wanted without having to fundraise outside of that.
We've been talking with Kathy Hickey on KCSS Voices of the Community. And Kathy, I want to thank you again for coming in and talking to us.
Thank you, George. This is great.
And sharing your experience on how to, work with small businesses in our communities. This is George Coster from KCSF's Voices of the Community. If you're just joining us, today we're discussing the social and economic impact of financially enabling small businesses in our community through economic development, community development, and civic innovation. We have been speaking with Kathy Hickey of Hickey Consulting about how her organization works with local governments and business organizations to develop commercial districts where small businesses can flourish and residents can live, shop, work, and play. We'll be right back after this public service announcement.
Just this second, another kid dropped out of school. If we do nothing, 3.5 million kids won't receive a diploma over the next 4 years. United Way knows that kids of a caring adult in their life are more likely to make it, and the difference between a dropout and a graduate could be you. Take the pledge to volunteer now at unitedway.org. Brought to you by United Way and the Ad Council.
Welcome back to KCSF's Voices of the Community. This is George Koster, and today we're discussing some of the civic innovation solutions being executed to help our fellow community members and micro-enterprises gain access to resources through community and economic development. We are speaking with Kathy Hickey, founder of Hickey Consulting, Carla Mays, founder of Mays Civic Innovation, and Andrea Baker, founder of Andrea Baker Consulting. This is George Koster from KCSS Voices of the Community. I'm here with Carla Mays from Mays Civic Innovation. Carla's an advisor and strategist in the civic innovation space. Carla, what is civic innovation?
Civic innovation really is where we're talking about government, right? We're talking about anything in government or the civic space. We talk about civic participation and innovation of that of this is the policy, is the financing, is land use, housing, transportation, just about everything that you enjoy on a daily basis and that you have some interaction with that is public.
What drew you to working in civic innovation?
You know, I've always been very interested in urban economics, urban land use, and housing. So those in San Francisco State, my undergrad degree was a special major, which was urban studies, political science, counseling, and psychology, understanding how people lived in the urban environment. And then I went on to do my master's at San Francisco State in public administration, where I then focused on urban administration and nonprofits, and then really looking at public-private partnerships and environmental land use.
With the kind of better understanding of how the ecosystem of the civic space comes together, I know that you have spent a lot of time kind of in the technology space and housing, but technology appears to be something that you really have a passion for.
Yes.
How do you see technology improving, empowering, the economic benefits of what some would call the digital have-nots?
Yes. So I can honestly say founding Mays Civic Innovation was really because of Sonny Wright McPeak. Sonny,
And who is Sonny?
Okay, Sonny Wright McPeak is the president and CEO of the California Emerging Technologies Fund, CETF, better known as. It was created in 2006 out of the mergers between Pac-Bell and AT&T and Verizon and MCI. So this, it's like monopoly money, was to make sure that we ensured that the public had, that we were making sure that all Californians were online. Because as we understand, if you're not online, you can't apply for a job. You can't, your children can't do their homework. You can't keep up with what's going on. Everything is based on broadband and smartphones. And so, I met Sonny in November of 2013. And I was talking with her and talking about all these different things that were going on in Silicon Valley and where I saw the digital space moving and how we could begin to impact those who were offline and those who were marginalized because of the digital, kind of getting the negative side of the innovation economy. And she said, okay, Carla, then here's some tasks. And if you, come when you get back to, because we were in Los Angeles, she goes, when you get back to San Francisco, give me a call, we'll have a meeting. And what she did was she gave me the first opportunity to work on these things and to work here in San Francisco with Mayor Lee and the Office of Civic Innovation, trying to work with these offices and the bureaucratic things that occur with this, and then talking with the tech companies like Cisco and Google and looking at what is the next generation of these technologies, and being able to really work backwards and think about how we're going to have everybody participate in the economy and in the digital infrastructure. Sonny Wright McPeak has a long history of this kind of social advocacy. She began this work many, many moons ago, and just is, her leadership is outstanding. She's been a mentor like no other, and she has been an advocate for closing the digital divide. Right now, she's been working on extending the Lifeline program as we have it right now for the telephone, and extending that into the broadband, and having broadband service at home. She was really instrumental in the president making the speech about getting those digital standards of the over 25 MPGs, being faster and being able to have digital equity. And Sunny started the Bay Area Council, as well as she was a longtime supervisor with the County of Contra Costa, and then she served under Governor Schwarzenegger as the Secretary of Housing, Finance, and Transportation. So I was very, very fortunate to have her as a mentor, serve under her.
Using Sunny as your mentor,
yes,
and all of the knowledge that you've gained in working within that organization, how are you executing what it is that you learned? Because I know you're a big executor.
I am. Compared to Sunny, I'm just learning. It's like having training wheels on. And it is training wheels, because in innovation, you're testing things, right? You're testing it, you're finding out. So some of the work that I've been doing is, I've been in Los Angeles, got a chance to be a part of the Civic Innovation Lab. I'm born in Los Angeles to, grandparents who came from the Deep South for a better life and moved to Los Angeles, and were entrepreneurial and involved in aerospace. Being able to go back and be in the Civic Innovation Lab, I met a lot of co-conspirators, including Gene Holmes of NASA, Brad Carson, who's of the LA Probation Department. He also brokered the peace between the Bloods and the Crips. And then Lori Mitchell, who is the founder of Black Women in Tech, Los Angeles. And being able to be co-conspirators with these three has been amazing. So we are talking about what does it mean to be in this innovation economy, and to really plug up the holes and gaps that are making it unfair and causing gentrification. So we're looking at creating digital access, capital access centers, and really wanting to work with Google and work with programs like Kiva Zip, Mission Asset Fund. I am such a fan of Mission Asset Fund and Jose Quinones. And then looking at programs that Jose Cisneros, under his leadership with the Office of Financial Empowerment, being able to see how we can integrate some of these programs to be able to bring both digital equality and financial equality, and then looking at what does that mean in a community that is undergoing the I would say the negative externalities of the innovation economy, which is trying to fix this digital equity and being able to make sure that we have the startups and the small businesses.
So taking it on the high level, and let's drill down into two communities that I know are really important to you, and that you have a vision of how to take what you've been doing and execute on the ground. One is the Bayview, so let's start there.
Okay.
And then we'll go into your vision of the Fillmore as well.
I can be honest with you, I've really struggled to try to work with these communities. San Francisco has a very complicated history over the years, whether you're talking about Justin Herman and land use, or you're talking about, the myriads of philanthropic programs. They've been trying to do good, but they don't necessarily answer the call for the people in the community. And they don't have a real bottoms-up approach. As much money as we have here in San Francisco, there are really approaches of very smart people coming from elsewhere, big institutions. We've got to stop playing with these folks in these communities, and we've got to give them real access to capital and things. So in the Bayview, I'm a real fan of the work of Sandra, the housing, the SF Housing Corporation there, and what they've been doing to bring that kind of equity. We did a hackathon with the city about a year ago now, and we were trying to bring on the platforms, but then really look at what's that online engagement. I'm trying to look at how to work with them. It's not necessarily the easiest thing to do, because everybody's got a lot of things in motion, right? We're San Francisco. We're small, but we're mighty. I would love to see one of these digital access centers there. And I'd like to, work more with them. The last thing that I did in the Bayview is actually Sunny and I and the team joined Mayor Lee in Bayview. And we were talking about the Hope SF, and what were some of the things that we could do together on closing the digital divide.
Digital access and asset centers, what do the centers consist of?
Like I said, we're in the design phase right now.
If I was a listener to the program, how would I get engaged in helping you and your team bring the center into the Excelsior or Bayview or Lower Fillmore?
We are very interested in literally working with the city of San Francisco, other municipalities. So we are, I've for years tried to work with Jay Naff over at the Office of Civic Innovation, and tried to crack that nut, trying to get meetings with them where they really think differently. The real disruption is if we could really build these things out to really onboard folks to what they're needed instead of what we think they need. We do a lot of design thinking. It would be really good if we could do that with the community and actually fulfill those needs with our community development block grant money and other services. I would say for me, it's two things: working with foundations and individuals that want to work on these issues. I'm very open. My email address is carla@maysinnovates.co, and that's Carla, C-A-R-L-A, at Mays, M-A-Y-S, Innovates, INNOVATES.co. Reach out, and what we're talking about is we need philanthropy, we need government, because we are talking about the conduit in the ground. We're talking about plugging in, into working with Google, working with Cisco, working with, Intuit, because it's literally in the ways of being able to work with these tech companies and being able to work with philanthropy, and then really having a deep dialogue on where we think communities can really thrive and what can they do. Because we have an idea of these jobs. And I said I practice civic innovation. I've been spending time down at Stanford Research Institute with Dr. David Neffers with the I4J program, where we're looking at, innovation of the unemployed. At the Silicon Valley Innovation Center, talking about AI and robotics. And what are these impacts on our, what is jobs going to look like? And they don't look like jobs. They look like contracts. They look like people being small business owners. And therefore, we need to change the way we think about these things. Is we're looking to create those tools and places where people can deal with this disruption in a way where they're getting what they need to be able to be coming into our 21st century economy, in being able to provide space. I can't tell you, Kate at SF Made, the way she's leading the efforts with placemaking. So, they have a partnership, but we're going to see nonprofit space for makers and for businesses. That's what we need. We need more of these communities along our corridors. We need more nonprofit spaces so that we can have our flavor of San Francisco retained. So you got the folks in the community actually have a place for their small business, that their small business is allowed to get a startup grant. My friend Sarah over in Oakland with Pop-Up Hood. We need Pop-Up Hood here in San Francisco, in the Mission District, in Bayview, in Fillmore, and other areas that have been really critically challenged by our innovation economy. So they need space. And we have amazing programs here. I want to, give a lot of shouts out. We have the best environment for entrepreneurs ever in any place in the country, and I travel quite a decent amount. We've got Regina with small business, executive director with small business, amazing work that Regina is doing and has been doing. You've got Mark Quinn over at SBA that is leading the nation in having the best SBA with the best programs that you can possibly get. So those are a lot of free resources. Mayor Lee just announced Kiva Zip, the San Francisco part of Kiva Zip that they're working. We have a Healthy SF for health and, for you to be able to, be insured and your family insured. We have the programs. And then we also have the Mayor's Office of Housing and Community, where we have BMRs to purchase and BMRs for rental.
And BMRs are?
Below market rate units. So the city has plans, has a lot of programs to help you buy that first time home. And here in the city, I have my business here. I'm here because of the fact that there are programs.
Is there anything else you'd like to say to the community before we wrap up?
Well, I would like to say is that I'm always available. Reach out to me on Twitter. I'm Carla Mays, Carla, C-A-R-L-A, Mays, M-A-Y-S. I really would love to work with some more impact investors and philanthropists that are thinking about digital equity and inclusion and the innovation economy, working with bankers and folks. But then I also want to be able to, hear the community's point of view. So folks that are in this work and that would have been their experiences. And then how can we work better with, Mayor Lee and other offices here in San Francisco.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This is George Coster from KCSF's Voices of the Community. You've been listening to an interview with Carla Mays, who's working with local government, businesses, financial institutions, nonprofits, and social impact investors to bring civic innovation to our low-income neighborhoods. We'll be right back after these announcements.
Did you know that 1 in 6 Americans struggle with hunger? They're our friends. They're our coworkers. Their kids go to school with our kids. Sometimes we're not even aware that they're struggling. This problem is closer than you think, but so is the solution. Visit feedingamerica.org today and find your local food bank for ways to help. Together, we're Feeding America. A public service announcement brought to you by Feeding America and the Ad Council.
Did you know you can listen to KCSF 90.9 live right in your smartphone? KCSF is now available to listen to on the go with TuneIn Radio. Go to tunein.com and download the app to your phone, or just listen through your browser. This is tunein.com to start listening live to KCSF 90.9, your community, your radio.
This is George Coster from KCSF's Voices of the Community. If you're just joining us, today we're discussing some of the economic development, community development, and civic innovation programs to address the economic divide within our neighborhood commercial corridors. In today's show, we're speaking with Kathy Hickey, founder of Hickey Consulting, Carla Mays, founder of Mays Civic Innovation, and Andrea Baker, founder of Andrea Baker Consulting. This is George Coster from KCSF's Voice of the Community. I'm here today with Andrea Baker of Andrea Baker Consulting. Andrea and her team are working in the Bayview community of San Francisco, focused on attracting, retaining, and supporting small businesses along with providing her unique blend of community development. Andrea, welcome to the Voices of the Community.
Thanks for having me.
When did you begin to work in community development?
Wow, that's a really good question. You're taking me all the way back. I think that I would say it's been about 17 years now that I've been doing, and I don't think that when I started working in community development that I formally acknowledged that that was what I was doing. But now, 17 years later, I think that is what I was doing when I started 17 years ago.
Is it something that came out of a need that you saw in the community? Was it something, I guess my question is, what kind of drove you to the work of economic and community development?
I had been an entrepreneur pretty much for majority of my career. Opened 7 businesses over the course of 8 years. So I felt that, and when I stopped sort of giving birth to businesses, because I used to call the businesses my inanimate kids. And when I started having animated kids, I decided I couldn't do them both. And I took some time off to focus on my animated kids. And then when I thought about coming back into the work world as it was, I realized that I really had an affinity and an understanding for small businesses and the challenges that they faced, and sort of also how lonely being a small business owner can be. And I'm talking about a truly small business owner where oftentimes it's 1, 2, maybe 3 people. That sort of sparked the interest, and I knew that I wanted to work with small businesses. And when I think about small businesses that are, comprised of 1, 2, 3 people, that's quite often in communities that are emerging communities. That actually in San Francisco led me initially actually to doing work here in the Excelsior, and then to the Fillmore, and then to the Bayview. So that it's sort of an evolution of all of that.
As I recall, you worked with the mayor's office, and that was when the city of San Francisco had a redevelopment agency. So did you start first as a small business owner, and then migrate into, as a small business owner, my fellow small business owners need the following?
Right.
And then what led you into the mayor's office?
So actually, what happened is I had been doing a lot of consulting work, business attraction work for groups like Forest City and Millennium Partners. So I'd worked with them on the Metreon, the Yerba Buena Lane project, and when Forest City first acquired Westfield, also worked with them on that. And then, as you will recall, the economy started doing this downturn. This was right around 2006, 2007. Things started getting a little iffy. So actually, right at that point, I got a call from the redevelopment agency who said, hey, we have a job, and it's a real prescriptive job. It's only for a year, and we need a project manager to help us sunset the Western Addition, which was then a redevelopment project area. And I thought, okay, things are sort of not so great, consulting now with the economy. Sure, I'll take it on, I'll do it for a year. And so I went to work for the redevelopment agency, specifically to help close out the Western Addition as a redevelopment project area. And that stay with them extended into being ultimately 4.5 years, in part because I guess they felt that I made myself useful. So they kept finding things for me to do, but also because at the end of my second year, the Mayor's Office of Economic and Workforce Development reached out to the redevelopment agency and asked if they could sort of borrow me to continue, because now we had sunset the Western Addition, and the mayor's office had taken on the responsibility of doing corridor coordination for Lower Fillmore. Because I had this institutional knowledge, OEWD was interested in having me work with them while they tried to develop an economic development strategy for the Lower Fillmore. So I went to work for OEWD doing that.
Walk us through what you mean by corridor work, and then a follow-up to that would be what you mean by business attraction and retention.
Okay. So currently, the Mayor Lee has a program called Invest in Neighborhoods, and Invest in Neighborhoods is currently in 25 neighborhoods within the city, and there's a certain sort of standard for determining how you become an Invest in Neighborhood, but it's usually around you are a commercial corridor within a district, a community that is sort of fledgling. Trying to figure it out. And this is the mayor's office then brings a variety of resources to that particular corridor. Generally speaking, there's grant funding that pays for a part-time or full-time corridor manager, and the corridor manager is responsible for connecting with merchants along the corridor and CBOs along the corridor, and then working with the mayor's office to identify grant funds, resources, anything that can help that particular corridor to sort of achieve its maximum output. And so that's really the role that a corridor manager plays, you know. When I talk about business attraction, what that generally means, I'll give you an example. When I started working in the Fillmore as de facto the corridor manager for OEWD, we had almost a 40% vacancy rate in the lower Fillmore. Part of the strategy, as we looked at economic development strategies, of course, it included how do we activate these storefronts. And part of my job was looking at finding prospective tenants for those spaces. And so it's attraction because we've got to figure out how do we bring those people and how do we make it so that they want to be there. And even though now I've said, you know, it's attraction and we want to entice them and we want to motivate them, and those things are absolutely true. I'm also a big believer that the key thing is the operator needs to want to be there. While I think incentives are good and that you can throw resources and you can try to motivate business owners to come to a specific corridor, intrinsically they have to want to be there, because those motivations, those incentives can expire pretty quickly when you face day-to-day challenges. So business attraction means, for me, going out, outreaching, and first identifying what are the neighborhood serving businesses that are needed on the corridor, and then trying to match that profile to folks who are existing or maybe non-existing. They could be a new business and you want to somehow nurture that business, and then bringing them into the space and hopefully working with them to become a successful part of the corridor.
It's very interesting about business retention. It sounds like you were able to take the 40% unoccupied space,
and we are down to less than 10%. We're down to 6% vacancy rate currently. Well, with a recent nudge, I'd say about 8% vacancy rate on the corridor, on the Fillmore corridor.
The business corridors and the Mayor's Office of Workforce and Economic Development, it sounds like they've supplanted what was the old redevelopment agencies.
That's correct. Well, the old redevelopment agency, there were only specific neighborhoods or districts that had redevelopment project areas. With the Mayor's Office of Economic and Workforce Development and the Invest in Neighborhoods plan, they're actually reaching many more corridors than SFRA was able to do. So I will say that about, and it's very much more hands-on. I think when an area becomes a redevelopment project area, the former redevelopment was more focused on rebuilding physical structures. And I think it would be fair to say that the Mayor's Office of Economic Workforce Development, known as MOEWD, that those guys are more focused on technical assistance that goes directly to businesses, grants, that sort of stuff. So they're more the interior of the body, whereas SFRA was actually building the physical structure.
Technical assistance is one of the services in your suite of services that your agency provides. What does technical assistance look like for a small business?
Technical assistance for a small business could cover a variety of things. As you and I know, many small businesses, and I count myself in that group because we all started someplace. You know, there is the starting with the shoebox, right? And you collect all the receipts in the shoebox, and you're never really quite sure about where you are and how much you have and what you can afford. So technical assistance can be as basic as assisting a business in setting up a bookkeeping system, right? Or it could be, I am a restaurant and I have never ever, I just sort of, I love to eat, I love to cook. Everybody tells me I make great food. I opened this restaurant and I started selling, and somehow I don't seem to be making any money. And then having going in and being able to say, well, there's a certain there's work you need to do before you open your doors. So you need to cost out your menu. So before you price something, you really do need to know what it's actually going to cost you to make that item. We've been able to provide technical assistance around like going through and completely redoing a menu for a restaurant, let's say. So, and we'll take the owner through the process of, here is what your food cost is, and then based on that's your food cost, and this is what you need to price it at. Quite frequently we go into businesses and we have to work with them to develop P&L statements because that's something they've just sort of never done. And I'm sort of starting with technical assistance around numbers primarily, because that without those numbers, then businesses don't get access to larger resources. You can't get a bank loan. You can't get any sort of financing. You can't go to a CBO and get additional support because you don't know where you are to begin with. So technical assistance covers all of that stuff. It also involves marketing. Whoa, I've opened the business 2 years ago. I sort of hit this plateau. Nothing's happening. So also being able to go in and sort of be a sounding board for a business owner and help them think it through. Personally, my strategy around business attraction is, it is not my intention to do the work for the business owner. It is my intention to provide direction and to be a shadow, as it were. But I think it's really important for the business to actually go through the process themselves, because by doing we learn, right? That's more my approach. I don't believe that it makes sense for me to just come in and do it, because then when I walk away, what I know walks away with me. What I want to happen is after I've left you, you feel like you now have a new skill that you didn't have before.
The P&Ls being profit and loss.
Profit and loss
And
statements.
then a CBO.
A community-based organization. Thank you.
With all of this work and your passion for helping small businesses, and we talk about micro enterprises, which some people call mom and pop businesses,
Absolutely.
or to your point, 1 to 3 people or 4 people in a business. What brought you into the Bayview community, where you're kind of focusing your attention and your passion today?
Well, there are 2 things that come to mind immediately when you say that. I have to give credit to Claudia Wieck. And Claudia Wieck is someone who worked in this area of working with small businesses. She created Renaissance Entrepreneurship Center way back when. And Claudia had since retired as the CEO of Renaissance. But she was working with SFHDC, San Francisco Housing Development Corp. They had just gotten a big federal grant to build 4800 3rd Street, a development with, I believe, 22 units in it, and it would have ground floor commercial. At the time, which was probably now, oh my goodness, we're dating ourselves, probably 12 years out or more, 15 years ago, somewhere in that range. That would have been the big sort of major development on 3rd Street at the time. And Regina Davis was the CEO of SFHDC, and Claudia had a contract with Regina to help to identify businesses, to try to bring businesses to the corridor. Claudia, knowing my work, and because I had been an instructor at Renaissance Entrepreneurship for many years, teaching their marketing series, Claudia pulled me in and said I could really use your help in how, someone reminded me just this past week that 15 years ago, the goal that Claudia, Regina, and myself had was to have 6 restaurants along the 3rd Street corridor. That was our lofty goal at that time. And of course, one of those was intended to be, or actually at the time 2 of them, at ground floor commercial of this development that SFHDC was building, which then became 4800 3rd Street. So Claudia and I started working on this small contract on how can we bring 6 restaurants to 3rd Street. So that was the beginning of beginning to actively work in the Bayview.
Obviously, there's the economic and social, cultural dynamic going on, the push and pull, more residents moving into the Bayview, increasing the price of housing, etc., harder to start businesses perhaps, no redevelopment agency.
No redevelopment agency. But there are, I think the mayor's office is committed to putting, and I keep hearing about all the funds that are going to be going to the Bayview. So I would say, there's a lot of push-pull in Bayview. One, it's one of the last neighborhoods in the city where folks can maybe try to establish something. It's not completely built out yet. I mean, I often say to folks when I'm wearing my business attraction hat and bringing businesses out to the corridor, that this is a neighborhood that still has great facades, right? Because they have a lot of older buildings still in them. And that, small as it may seem, can be an enticement to a business owner. Not everyone wants a brand new, modern, spanking storefront. So I think that is one. But the neighborhood is changing, and there are a lot of different people coming into the neighborhood. There has to be a way to figure out how we can all play well in the sandbox together. And I say that because, yes, gentrification is happening. And certainly, the Bayview was always thought of as a predominantly African American community. It is no longer predominantly African American. That's not surprising. The city is not African American. It's gone from 14% to well under 6% right now. But nonetheless, diversity comes in other ways other than color. And so I think it's still important to get all the folks who are there to play well in the sandbox together, because a community is like a quilt, it doesn't all match. It wasn't all made at the same time in the same place. But if everybody's represented on that quilt, it can look really gorgeous and it can last a lifetime. And I think therein is our challenge. How are we going to do that?
This is George Coster from KCSF's Voices of the Community, and we've been speaking with Andrea Baker about her community development work in our commercial corridors to enable small businesses and local neighborhoods to come together and reinvent their neighborhood's cultural, economic, and social fabric. We'll be right back after this public service announcement. Welcome back to KCSF's Voices of the Community. This is George Coster, and we've been discussing some of the economic and community development as well as civic innovation programs to address the economic divide within our neighborhood commercial corridors. I want to thank Kathy Hickey, a community development consultant, Carla Mays, founder of Mays Civic Innovation, and Andrea Baker of Andrea Baker Consulting for sharing their stories about how they're each working to develop and execute solutions to support the revitalization of our neighborhoods and the social and economic impact of financially enabling small businesses in our community. For more great stories about economic and community development solutions, please listen to our two-part Doing Business in the Bayview shows to find out more about what's being executed to support our neighborhoods. To get the link to the shows, please go to Mixcloud and search for Voices of the Community and click on the Doing Business and the Bayview shows. We will post the links to the organizations featured on today's show in the KCSF's Facebook page, and you can always email me at george@georgecoster.com if you'd like more information about any of the organizations featured in today's show. Thank you for listening to KCSF's Voices of the Community, and please tune into our next show, December 15th. We'll be talking to Michael Stoll, Executive Director and Editor of the San Francisco Public Press, about these top 3 stories in 2015. The resegregation of San Francisco public schools, sea level rise and its impact on communities in the San Francisco Bay, and the accelerating cost of living in San Francisco. You can find us at Mixcloud through searching KCSF and Voices of the Community for postings of past and upcoming shows. We look forward to hearing from you on what you liked about the shows and any additional show topics that you'd like to hear. Thanks again for listening to Voices of the Community on KCSF, your community, your radio.